Ladies and gentlemen, if you thought the British royal family had already delivered every possible bombshell this decade, think again. What happened inside Buckingham Palace in the dead of night last week is being described by those who were there as the most extraordinary emergency meeting since the darkest days of the Queen's final illness. King Charles himself called it. He cleared the diaries of the most senior courtiers, summoned Prince William from Windsor under a veil of secrecy, and locked the doors. By the time the meeting ended, the future of the monarchy had been rewritten in ways no one outside those walls was supposed to know until now. What you are about to hear is not rumor dressed up as fact. It comes from multiple sources who were either in the room or briefed within hours of the meeting. And the central revelation is this. King Charles has already begun laying out the detailed blueprint for Prince William's coronation, years earlier than anyone expected, and under circumstances far more urgent than the public has been told. The meeting took place on a rainy Thursday evening. The official diary simply listed it as private audience. In reality, the king had ordered the equerry to gather the key players, the private secretary, the keeper of the privy purse, the Archbishop of Canterbury's senior representative, and, most importantly, the Prince of Wales himself. Camilla was present for the first half hour only. Then she left. What followed lasted nearly 3 hours. According to those familiar with the conversation, Charles opened with a line that instantly set the tone. He is said to have looked directly at his eldest son and said, "William, the throne is not a prize to be inherited in comfort. It is a responsibility that can arrive without warning. I intend to make certain you are ready, fully ready, long before the moment comes." The room fell silent. William, sources say, sat forward in his chair. He had expected a discussion about the king's ongoing cancer treatment and public appearances. What he received instead was a detailed presentation of coronation planning documents that had already been drafted in secret by a small team working under the king's personal direction. These documents, described as living blueprints, cover everything from the date window and the guest list philosophy to the exact role of Catherine, the future queen, and the public messaging that will surround the day. Most strikingly, they include a contingency timeline that could see William crowned within months of any sudden change in the king's health, not the traditional year of mourning and preparation that previous generations observed. One courtier who later spoke on condition of anonymity put it bluntly, His Majesty is not being morbid. He is being practical. The world moves faster now. The public's patience is shorter, and the monarchy's survival depends on seamless continuity. Charles is determined that there will be no vacuum, no speculation, no sense of drift. The king reportedly walked William through several key decisions he has already made. First, the coronation will be deliberately smaller and more modern than his own in 2023, yet still steeped in the ancient rituals that give the ceremony its power. The guest list will prioritize Commonwealth leaders, younger working royals, and representatives of the next generation of British society rather than the sprawling aristocratic turnout of previous eras. The music will blend traditional anthems with contemporary British compositions. And, in a move that is already causing quiet shockwaves, the king has instructed that the ceremony must visibly center the partnership between William and Catherine as equal pillars of the future reign. That last point is crucial. Charles is said to have told his son, "Your mother and I learned, sometimes painfully, that the public needs to see a strong, united couple at the heart of the institution. You and Catherine already have that. We will build the entire day around it." William's reaction, according to those present, was measured but intense. He asked detailed questions about the constitutional implications, about the role of Prince George as a new heir, and about how the public will be prepared if the transition happens sooner than expected. He did not push back against the planning itself. Instead, he is reported to have said, "If this is what the country needs, then we do it properly. No half measures." But the meeting did not end with logistics. It turned personal, and that is where the real shock began to ripple outward. Charles is understood to have spoken with unusual frankness about his own health. While official statements continue to describe his condition as under control, the king told a small group that he is planning for every eventuality. He has already signed updated instruments of advice regarding the Council of State and the temporary transfer of certain duties. More significantly, he has begun the private process of ensuring that William is fully briefed on every sensitive file that a monarch must master, from intelligent assessments to the personal relationships with foreign heads of state that cannot be written down. One source described the atmosphere as electric and slightly unreal. Another said simply, "It felt like watching a father hand the keys of the kingdom to his son while still very much alive and determined to remain so." The emergency nature of the gathering became clearer when the discussion moved to public communication. Charles is said to have insisted that no official announcement about coronation planning would be made unless and until necessary. Yet he also acknowledged that leaks were inevitable. "The palace walls have ears," he allegedly remarked. "Better that the truth, when it comes out, is our truth." And that is precisely what is happening now. Within 48 hours of the meeting, carefully controlled fragments of information began reaching a handful of trusted journalists and former royal aides. The story that has emerged is not one of crisis, but of deliberate, almost radical preparation. King Charles is not merely hoping for a smooth succession. He is engineering it in real time. Prince William left the palace at night under heavy security. Those who saw him said he looked thoughtful rather than shaken. The following morning he cancelled 2 non-essential engagements and spent several hours at Windsor in private conversation with Catherine. What they discussed remained strictly between them, but the speed with which the couple's joint public schedule was adjusted in the days that followed has not gone unnoticed by royal watchers. Meanwhile, inside the palace, the small planning team has been instructed to continue its work in absolute secrecy. Draft guest lists are being refined. Liturgical texts under review. Security scenarios for potentially accelerated timeline are being wargamed. And the king himself continues to review every major decision. The implications are profound. If these plans are as advanced as sources claim, then the next coronation will not be a distant, almost theoretical event. It is being treated as a live operational priority. That reality alone is enough to send shockwaves through the entire royal household and beyond. What makes the story even more compelling is the contrast with Charles' own path to the throne. He waited longer than any heir in history. He endured decades of public scrutiny, personal turmoil, and a slow, careful evolution of his role. Now, as king, he appears determined that his son will not face the same prolonged uncertainty. The message from that emergency meeting is unmistakable. The future is being secured today. Yet questions remain, questions that only deepen the intrigue. Why the sudden urgency? Is the king's health more fragile than the public has been led to believe? Or is this simply the action of a monarch who has always preferred to control the narrative rather than react to it? How much does the wider family know? And what role, if any, will Prince Harry play in a ceremony that is being redesigned around a leaner, more focused monarchy? Those answers are still locked behind palace doors. But the fact that the doors were opened at all, even briefly, tells us something significant. King Charles has chosen to act. He has chosen to prepare. And in doing so, he has set in motion a chain of events that will reshape the public's understanding of the next chapter of the House of Windsor. The emergency meeting is over. The plans are in motion. And the nation, whether it realizes it yet or not, has just taken a decisive step closer to the reign of King William V. What happens next will depend on forces no one can fully control. The king's health, the public's reaction when the full story inevitably surfaces, and the quiet strength of the couple who stand ready to inherit the weight of the crown. One thing is already certain. The old way of doing things, the long, slow, almost leisurely transfer of power, is being retired. In its place is something sharper, more modern, and, some would say, more realistic for the century we now inhabit. The palace may hope to keep the details confidential a little longer. But history has a way of accelerating when a monarch decides a time for preparation has come. And last week, inside that locked room, King Charles made that decision. The decision Charles made in that locked room was not a vague intention. It was a set of concrete instructions that have already begun reshaping the machinery of the monarchy. In the days that followed the emergency meeting, selected members of the royal household received tightly controlled briefings. The language used was careful, almost clinical. Contingency readiness, accelerated continuity protocols, future sovereign preparedness. Behind the bureaucratic phrasing lay a simple truth. The king has ordered that Prince William be treated, in practical terms, as a monarch in waiting whose coronation could be required with far less notice than tradition has ever allowed. Sources familiar with the next phase of planning reveal that the blueprint goes well beyond guest lists and music choices. It includes a detailed sequence for the days immediately after any sudden change in the king's condition. The accession council would still meet, of course, but the ceremonial and public elements that follow have been streamlined. William would address the nation within hours rather than days. The proclamation would be coordinated across the Commonwealth with pre-agreed messaging, and the coronation itself, once set in motion, would aim for a window measured in months, not the full year that separated Charles' own accession from his crowning. This compressed timeline is said to have been one of the points William questioned most carefully. He wanted to understand the symbolic cost of moving faster. Charles' answer, according to those briefed afterwards, was characteristically direct. Symbolism that arrives too late is not symbolism. It is nostalgia. The country will need certainty more than it will need pageantry stretched across 12 months. The conversation then turned to the role of the next generation. Prince George, still a child, would become heir apparent in an instant. The king is understood to have insisted that any public communication must protect the young prince's childhood as far as possible while still acknowledging the constitutional reality. Catherine's place in the ceremony received equal attention. Far from being a supporting figure, she is being positioned as a co-central presence, a deliberate signal that the next reign will be defined by partnership rather than solitary authority. One detail that has particularly unsettled some traditionalists inside the palace is a proposed treatment of the wider family. The guest list under discussion is leaner than any previous coronation. Certain distant relatives who attended in 2023 may not receive the same prominence. More sensitive still is the question of Prince Harry. Sources stress that no final decision has been taken, but the working assumption inside the planning group is that any invitation will be carefully calibrated, present if reconciliation allows, absent if it does not, and never allowed to dominate the narrative. Charles is said to have told William, "This day must belong to the future, not to old wounds." The emotional weight of that exchange has not been lost on those who heard about it. For decades, a relationship between father and son carried the complicated legacy of Diana, of Camilla, of the long apprenticeship Charles himself endured. In the emergency meeting, those layers appeared, briefly, to fall away. What remained was a monarch speaking to his successor with unusual clarity and a prince listening with the gravity of someone who understands that the conversation may one day become the foundation of his own reign. Outside the palace walls, the first tremors of the story are already being felt. Royal correspondents have begun receiving the same carefully phrased hints from different directions. Former aides who left service years ago are being contacted by journalists asking whether they have heard anything about forward planning. The official line remains unchanged. The king's health is stable, his program continues, and talk of succession is premature. Yet the speed with which the palace has moved to dampen speculation only fuels it. When an institution that usually ignores rumors suddenly issues quiet guidance against unhelpful conjecture, experienced observers take notice. Catherine's public appearances in the week after the meeting have been studied with microscopic intensity. She smiled. She carried out her engagements. She gave no outward sign of upheaval. Those who know the couple best say that is exactly what one would expect. The Waleses have long preferred to process significant developments in private before presenting a united front. Still, the slight adjustment to their joint schedule, fewer purely ceremonial outings, more time allocated to briefings, has not gone unnoticed by the small circle that watches such things closely. Meanwhile, the planning team continues its work under conditions of near total secrecy. Draft orders of service are being refined. Security assessments for an accelerated timeline are being updated. Conversations with the Church of England about possible liturgical adjustments are taking place at the highest level. And the king himself reviews progress with a regularity that suggests this is no theoretical exercise. What emerges from all of this is a portrait of a monarchy in deliberate transition. Charles is not stepping aside. He is not announcing any change in his own status. He is, however, ensuring that the institution he heads will not be caught unprepared. In doing so, he is rewriting the unspoken contract that has governed royal succession for generations, that the heir waits, patiently and largely in the background, until the throne becomes vacant. William is still the heir, but he is no longer only waiting. The deeper significance of the emergency meeting may lie in what it reveals about Charles's own understanding of his reign. He came to the throne later than any of his predecessors, carrying the knowledge that time is finite. His cancer diagnosis, however well managed, has sharpened that awareness. Rather than retreat into caution, he appears to have chosen the opposite path, to use whatever time remains to strengthen the foundation for what comes next. In that sense, the meeting was not an act of pessimism. It was an act of institutional responsibility. Yet the human dimension cannot be ignored. A father looking at his son and mapping out the day that son will be crowned is a moment freighted with emotion no amount of protocol can fully contain. Those who were present described the final minutes of the meeting as quieter than the rest. Charles is said to have ended with a simple observation. When the moment comes, you will not be alone. The work we begin tonight is so that you never have to face it unprepared. William's reply, if the accounts are accurate, was equally restrained. Then we begin. And so they have. The documents remain locked away. The public continues to see a king carrying out his duties and a Prince of Wales supporting him. But behind the familiar pageantry, a different reality is taking shape, one in which the next coronation is no longer a distant horizon but a carefully prepared possibility. The full consequences of that Thursday night meeting will only become clear with time. For now, the story stands as the most significant private development inside the royal family since the late Queen's final months. King Charles has chosen transparency with his heir over the comfort of delay. In doing so, he has placed the future of the monarchy on a new and more urgent footing. Whether that decision ultimately proves to be an act of foresight or the beginning of a more turbulent chapter is a question only the months and years ahead can answer. What can already be said with certainty is that the old assumptions no longer hold. The palace has been shaken, the heir has been briefed, and the plans for a coronation that once seemed comfortably remote are now being written in the present tense. The emergency meeting is over. Its repercussions have only just begun.